So we just heard Premier Kathleen Wynne talking about this a minute ago, a cap and trade system to deal with carbon emissions. But some premiers have very different views on how to do that. But one word hasn't been used in Canada lately, and that word is nuclear. But after a Saskatchewan company signed a contract to sell 7 million pounds of uranium to India between now and 2020, has nuclear energy re-entered the conversation, especially as premiers gathered to talk about greenhouse gas emissions ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris that will take place later this year? To find out, I'm joined now by Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. Good morning, Premier Wall, and welcome back to the House.
Happy to be here.
What's your take on the Ontario-Quebec cap and trade deal? Because you've been critical of cap and trade ideas in the past.
I have. There's certain cap and trade models where the proceeds, the revenue that's been generated from the capping and the trading, the revenues to government have not gone into finding technological solutions to the climate change problem. And if that's the case, to me, it's not environmental policy then, it's just a tax. But I hear from both Premiers Couillard and Wynne that they want to make sure they're finding a way to direct resources and investment from cap and trade into investing in technological solutions, much like I think the carbon tax is intended to do in British Columbia. And then I think it's reasonable that jurisdictions pursue what they think is best for them.
But what they do with the money isn't really the issue. Is the issue to curtail behavior and to drop carbon emissions? Isn't that the fundamental goal?
Evan, I think it has to be both. It has to be both. And here's why. If we all in Canada, every province and us as a family of provinces and territories, if we all exceed our emission targets and exceed them by a significant margin, what impact will it have in terms of the global issue? We're 1.7% of global emissions. Now, we're high per capita emitters, I readily admit it. But truly, if we're super successful, each of us, and we cut emissions in half in Canada, which isn't going to happen, but let's say we did, we're 1.7% of total emissions on the planet. So I think that's why it has to be both. It should be about behavior in our country. We should be accountable. But it also should be about finding technological solutions for the international problem, which I would submit is based mostly on the fact that coal continues to grow, not just in the developing world, in China and India, but Japan's building 40 more plants and Germany's expanding coal. And so the IPCC says we got to deal with coal, and Canada can help.
Okay, fair enough. But there may be technological solutions, but some say putting a price on carbon is a better reason. It's a market solution. And you talk about we're only 1.7, 1.8% of the coal emissions. But the whole notion of collective action is no matter what part of it you do, your action counts. That's why you don't litter and say, look, in the amount of garbage this contributes to Canada is 0.001, therefore I can litter.
No, you're right.
You do your part.
You have to do your part. And I'd point out that carbon pricing and ensuring proceeds from carbon pricing go to invest in technological solutions. That's not mutually exclusive. In fact, I'm arguing those have to be inextricably linked. Even in our clean coal project in Saskatchewan, we capture 90% of CO2 from a coal plant. Every ton of that CO2, 1 million tons a year, is sold to an oil company that use it for enhanced oil recovery. Then it's stored geologically and efficaciously underground. And we've been doing that for about 10 years, not the clean coal part, but the storage. So you can do both because we had to price the carbon in order to sell it.
Right.
And we've also made a huge direct $1.4 billion investment in this technology.
Let's talk about the federal role, because you have advocated actually an idea that is similar to Justin Trudeau's in the sense you think all provinces ought to find their own method to do this. Mm-hmm. Trudeau says you can do whatever you want as long as the government sets some kind of target goal. In the midst of that, some provinces like Ontario and Quebec have been critical of the federal government's lack of action on this. And you've got the Minister of the Environment, Leona Aglukkaq, sending that letter to the provinces this week, essentially chastising all of the premiers for not doing enough to reduce carbon emissions, not setting your targets. What do you make of the minister's letter and the federal government's role?
Well, I don't think the letter was overly critical. What the federal government's trying to do is be prepared for their presentation to the upcoming conference in Paris, which I understand, and we heard they'd like to have ready to go. They'd have ready to be released in June. But if the federal government is going to, I would just say this, the federal government invested $250 million in our carbon capture project. And so they were meaningful partners. And if we are going to find technological solutions to baseload electricity in places like, well, in our country, but also in places like China and India and other places around the world that are still using coal, we need the federal government to be a part of that, like they were on our project. And that's what I hope they continue to do.
Can they do both, though?
Absolutely, they can do both.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me talk about another issue that has been linked to climate change, and it was linked by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who, of course, had that visit to Canada. You met him in Ottawa. You've known him before in Gujarat, where he was the chief minister,
Right.
and you went there talking about this uranium deal.
Right.
7 million pounds of uranium to India between now and 2020 from your province. What's your take on, first of all, if you can give us any details on that, because we don't know the details on that, but how beneficial first that will be to Saskatchewan and maybe to greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, the details we know are pretty informative. Obviously, we're not going to learn the exact price because that's something that has to be kept between the company and those that are buying it in India. But we know that it's 7 million pounds over 5 years, and we know what the spot we know what the spot price is for uranium. So roughly, we know it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's going to retain jobs in our province. It's going to give us a chance to expand them. India wants to expand their nuclear power by 600%, and this is a good thing because right now on the books in India are plans for 572 new coal-fired plants, representing a lot of GHG emissions. And to the credit of Prime Minister Modi, he said a couple of days ago when he was in Ottawa, he said they want to contribute to a cleaner economy, to a low-carbon economy, and so they need to move in the area of nuclear power. Up until now, no Canadian uranium was sold into that market. We didn't have a nuclear cooperation agreement.
And there was a ban because of the nuclear testing issue
for
in the 70s and 19. There was a real trust issue whether they're using this stuff to test nuclear weapons.
Right. That's why I think Prime Minister Modi said at the press conference with Prime Minister Harper that he appreciated the fact that Canadians they're trusting India now, and we should. They have a robust civilian nuclear industry. So does China. We have a nuclear cooperation agreement with them as well. There's 50 million pounds going into that market. Cameco, the company that will sell the uranium, has the best record of employing Aboriginal people in our country in good paying jobs in the mining sector. 45% of their workforce in Saskatchewan is First Nation or Métis. That's a big deal. Maybe it shouldn't be today. Really, it shouldn't be, but
it is.
It is.
It is a bit ironic, and listeners might talk about this, where you've got the Indian Prime Minister talking about how important nuclear energy is and climate change, and the Prime Minister talking about it, and you're talking about it. And we don't do it here anymore in Canada for lots of reasons. They're very expensive. There is a NIMBY issue, not in my backyard issue. There's the Fukushima issue, what happened in Japan, as you know.
Right.
Is it time to rethink nuclear energy in Canada?
Well, we're biased in Saskatchewan because we have 15% of the world's fuel we mine every year. And, the bottom line is if we want to do something about baseload GHGs, which are principally coming at the highest levels anyway from coal, the renewables aren't quite there yet to replace that in a way that's cost effective, especially for developing economies. But uranium obviously is. China has an expanding program in nuclear power. So does India. We see the Middle East buying reactors and heading down this road. And I think it's time for us to revisit the issue at least. In parts of the country we've got a lot of hydro in Canada, and so a lot of parts of the country would say we just don't need it.
Well, in Quebec, they're not going to say that.
But in Saskatchewan, we're 40% reliant on coal. Now, the reactors are don't make sense from a size perspective for us yet, but for parts of the country that are heavily reliant on coal, I do think it should be part of the baseload discussion.
Interesting. And that's a politically volatile thing, but as you say, maybe that discussion gets kicked up. All right, well, I have you. You were in Ottawa. You saw the Prime Minister. Any last-minute budget requests?
No.
Well, on, you got to squeeze something in
We
there.
were there for the presentation of the deal with Prime Minister Modi, so that wasn't an opportune time to make an ask. I hope there's some infrastructure investment over and above what the feds have invested. And by the way, we've been treated well. We've had major projects funded from an infrastructure standpoint. We've been partners with the Building Canada Fund, but the infrastructure deficit in this country and in our province is real and it's big. And
but Building Canada Fund is $70 million,
correct.
$70 billion over 10 years, and most provinces say the truth is that's just a drop in a bucket on the one, and two, they say that investment in infrastructure is the great job multiplier. This is the time to do it.
Well, in our budget, it's balanced, but it's tighter. But but as an indicator and to underscore what you're saying, we're investing more in infrastructure for the reasons you've mentioned, and we'd like to have the federal government in for a bit more than they are right now.
Duffy, I got to ask you, because I know you're a huge supporter of the Senate, and you just want to build Senates everywhere. I mean, Senates.
The Senate, is that thing still around?
Yeah, it is.
Borrow a line from The Simpsons.
Have you Are you paying attention to the Duffy trial?
Kinda.
I mean, is this thing? How do you gauge this thing? Is this like a low-level common cold that it goes on for a long time and it may lead to nothing, or is this the kind of thing that after a couple months of watching this, suddenly the doctor says you got a problem and this is serious?
First of all, it is a great analogy, and secondly, I don't know on this one. And I've been in politics for a while. I'd like to think that at some point in my career, I'd be able to answer a question like that more definitively, to know with certainty that this is going to be lasting and bad for the government, or not as bad, or it's fleeting, or people don't care. I don't have a sense on this one. A lot of issues I know we both could probably answer. I honestly don't have a sense about.
Is it a trial on the Senate? The kind of thing that you could say, okay, let's get, I'll use the double C word, constitutional change that may do what you want to do. Some don't, but you want to abolish the Senate.
Well, it might do that. I was talking about what the political impact on the governing party when I was answering that, in terms of not understanding or not being able to discern what the impact will be. I do think that people are pretty focused on the fact that change is needed in the Senate. I think it should be radical change. I think we should save the $100 million and spend it on something else.
All right, I got to leave it there. Premier Brad Wall.
And Monday, I just want to say happy 57th birthday to you on Monday.
You know, it's funny. It's 67, but I do appreciate that. Premier Wall, good to have you on the program.
Thanks.